pleasure, as Director of the Center for Teaching and Learning Excellence, to welcome all of you to our first annual scholarly speaking event. And it's an honor to be here with you. It's an honor to be among those of you who have kept this activity alive. And it's a good reminder for those of us who have many years ago published and written articles and books that this is a scholarly activity to which we should try to update ourselves and keep active. So it is my honor to be among all of you when we look at your work outside, and those who are faculty and those who are on staff. That's a very impressive amount of work that kind of raises the bar for the rest of us. Encouraging and recognizing scholarly activity is a goal of the university, and it's a goal of the Center for Teaching and Learning Excellence. Not only do we want to encourage the classic research and publication, but I'm also encouraging and trying to promote the scholarship of teaching, and that is active research in the classrooms. And I'll be happy to work with any of you who'd like to pursue that activity. More importantly today, it is also a goal of our library. The librarians wanted to document this type of work on campus, and they also wanted to sponsor an event which would honor the recent publishing accomplishments of the ERAU Prescott campus community. And I compliment you on making this community-wide. They set forth the goals of this scholarly seeking program as follows: to heighten awareness of research and publications of the ERAU Prescott campus, to promote the library as a supporter of academic endeavors, to further encourage and support publications, and to educate the community on the value of scholarly publications. Clearly, credit goes to our librarians for bringing this program together and for sponsoring this excellent event. And I would like to turn the program over now to Sarah Thomas, our Director of the Library and Media Services. Sarah.
Thank you so much for coming to this recognition and celebration of publications of the Prescott campus community. To give you a background of how this event came about, a librarian at one of our meetings simply suggested, we need a way to celebrate our publications. We need to know what people are writing and to let others know about them too. So here we are, 5 months later, hosting this program for you. By the way, the librarian who spearheaded this idea was Joanne Evanoff. Thank you, Joanne. A committee was formed to determine the ways to spotlight the publications of our campus authors. I'd like to thank the committee members, Mike Burns, Suzanne DeLong, Paula Gray, Evelyn Harris, Rich Lewis, and Suzanne Gerhardt from the Library Advisory Committee. In the initial planning, we decided to provide a forum for the recognition and discussion, produce a bibliography, gather the publications, display them, and add them to the library collections. I would like to thank the people who funded this event: John Jenkins, Associate Dean of Academic Support; Dean Lukey, College of Aviation; Dean Richard Bloom, College of Arts and Sciences; and Dean Rayford, College of Engineering, and of course the library. In your program, you have a bibliography prepared by Suzanne DeLong and Paula Gray. Suzanne included citations from publications from 2002 to 2004, only from those authors who provided them to her. There may be others that are not listed. Now, I would like to formally recognize the authors and celebrate their publications with a symbol of acknowledgement from the library. Dr. Valerie Adams, Dr. Ans Mehta, okay. Dr. Angela Beck, Mr. Ray Bedard, thank you. Dr. Ray Bellum,
Ray's order trip.
okay. Dr. Richard Bloom, Mr. David Redstein, Melody Bruce, Dr. Leanne Chen, Suzanne DeLong, Dr. Richard Felton, Dr. Max Fogelman, Dr. Susan Gerhardt, Rita Gibson, Eileen Landis-Groom, Dr. Groom, Dr. Kalka, Mr. Jack Hartman, Dr. Haya Shabara, Mr. Jim Helbling, Dr. Paul Areljak, Dr. Matt Jaffe, Dr. Curtis James, Dr. Phil Jones, Dr. David Lanning, Mr. Dennis Lassard, Dr. Marriott, Dr. McElwain, Deb Myers, Dr. Parker, Kenneth Parsons, Mac Rollmeiser, Dr. Sinclair, and Mr. William Smith, Mr. Wes Stanfield, Dr. Terry Stovey, Dr. Van Dalen, he came in, Randy Weston, and Dr. Wishmeyer. These are the authors that had submitted their citations to us, and a copy of their publications will be included in the library. I'd like to. Librarians and universities know that scholarly communications is in crisis. The system, which is characterized by escalating journal prices and increasing corporate control, is unsustainable. The question becomes, what are libraries doing to address this issue? In 1997, the Association of Research Libraries initiated SPARC, the Scholarly Publishing and Academic Research Coalition. This is an alliance of academic and research libraries that has worked actively on the development of alternative publishing models and education programs to enhance awareness of scholarly communications issues. We thought that it was opportune to invite a guest speaker from SPARC who could bridge the business side of publishing to the academic side and who knows about the future trends of academic publishing fields. Julia Blixrud is the Assistant Director for Public Programs for SPARC. She has been in the library community for 25 years and is implementing a grassroots education program aimed at scholars, scientists, researchers, librarians, and university and society publishers, while encouraging faculty involvement in the movement of change in scholarly communications. In addition to her position at SPARC, Julia is the Assistant Executive Director, External Relations for the Association of Research Libraries. Please join me in welcoming Julia. Thank you.
And thank you very much for the invitation to come to this absolutely splendid location. If I drift off, it's because I'm sort of admiring mountains that I don't see in Kansas where I live. I work actually for the Association of Research Libraries in SPARC, which is located in Washington, D.C., and there we see mostly just buildings. So this is really quite nice to get out and enjoy the day. I want to talk with you today about how scholarly publishing has been changing and what we at SPARC have been doing and what we're seeing as happening out in the scholarly communications arena. And I would like to make it somewhat informal, so if there's something that I say that when it shows up on the slide, please go ahead and raise your hand and interrupt me. I'm happy to begin our dialogue even as we go through the presentation. The main thing that's happening for us today, and I think we're all aware of it, is how technology has been affecting our lives. And the environment in which we are operating, there are just some demonstration, there are some examples here from recent headlines in terms of what do we see happening in that environment. Things related to both restrictions and use of information, as well as as expansion on information. And one of the ways that information has been helpful to us has been how it can be shared, because we now have something that is called the internet, and we've used that a lot in our work. And the importance of sharing information cannot be underestimated, as the example of sharing the data from the SARS is used often to say we would not have been able to stop that as turning into an epidemic if we hadn't had scientists who were willing to share the information that they were gleaning about what was going on. For us in academia and research environments, there are a lot of other things that are affecting us. There are, in the commercial world, Google has indicated an interest in digitizing large amounts of information, as well as enhancing the variety of products that it has to search across digital information. It becomes a verb to Google, is a verb for us. In addition, there's a lot of advanced networking work, Internet 2 out there, helping our universities try to transmit large corpuses of data from one set of researchers to another. You'll see, obviously, in your work here, a lot of work being done about modeling what's happening in the chemistry field, and in particular, different scientists are working together. They're not in the same location, but are working on models across the internet. And these collaborations are not happening just in science. They're also happening in the humanities and social sciences as well. The example I have here is the STOA Consortium, which is classical studies, where information about life in early Greece, some of the data are really digitized images, and individuals working in that arena can offer their own explanations, interpolations, and other articles and publications that relate to this. But as this environment which we are working has developed, we've also been facing in libraries the problem of increasing costs of information. And this chart is compiled from data that has been collected from the members of the Association of Research Libraries. We began this chart in 1986 to try to get a handle on what was going on with especially serial unit costs and monograph costs. And the example is, not going to look at that easily, so I'll use familiar with, that the top line, I'm not going to give specific numbers just to see the trend line. The top line here are serial expenditures across the institutions. The consumer price index is this. So the difference between this and this is what universities have been trying to fund since 1986 in order to provide access to the information that the researchers, the scholars, the teachers need in order to do a good job by their students. In addition, we are not purchasing as many titles as we wanted to. The costs are increasing. We've reduced the number of titles we purchase, which basically means, as Sarah indicated, the system can be considered unsustainable. There's no way we can keep up. One of the causes for this has been the increase of commercial publishing, which has essentially controlled a lot of the dissemination of scientific, technical, and medical information. In this slide, we have data from a company called Outcell in 2000, which indicated that in the scientific, technical, medical marketplace, $8 billion marketplace, 2/3 of it is controlled by commercial publishers. There are only 7 publishers in that commercial that control most of the dissemination. They are large conglomerates of publishing. The not-for-profit group, the other third, are smaller societies who essentially publish 1 or 2 titles. And so these large commercial entities essentially try to get as much of the market as possible, and in fact are eating up some of the smaller society publishers. And one way that the large commercial publishers have been doing this has been to support the big deal, which means that they will package all of their titles together and offer them as a good deal for libraries. And that means that they can increase the amount of money that they get from the library, and which leaves less money for the library to spend on other kinds of materials. So that it squeezes the library even more. Libraries have been doing a good job in a number of ways to try to address these problems since 1986. They've improved document delivery services so that you can get a hold of a title, an article, a document that you need much more quickly than you could before. They're doing a fair amount with cooperative collection development by saying, I'll purchase this material if you purchase that. They share licenses to extend the electronic access to information. They are supporting the development of alternatives to high-priced journals, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. And in many cases, they are improving the ways in which they tell their faculty and administrators how much things cost. There are examples of libraries who have websites that will tell you this particular title that we subscribe to is equivalent to the cost of a small automobile on a yearly basis, or perhaps a cruise, or perhaps other large expenditures that you couldn't imagine that you would make on an annual basis. What's happened for us has been that now, finally over these many years, administrators have become aware of this problem. It's not just the library problem. It's a complete research institution problem. And we've seen some statements in the past year and a half in particular from campus administrators that they recognize that something needs to be done. And this is just a couple of the ones that have shown up recently. Both of them referring to the importance of scholarly research and the increased unsustainability of that information. And in many campuses, the faculty senates are passing resolutions saying, we understand the problem as well, and we support the efforts that our libraries are making to look for alternatives to providing information to us. And Tuesday, I was at a program at the University of Kansas where I saw yet another draft statement that their faculty senate will be voting on early next week that speaks to these same issues. As Sarah mentioned, SPARC was begun in the late 90s as a way for us in the Association of Research Libraries to be proactive about these issues of the high prices of journals. And in fact, we are now worldwide. We have over 200 members and have essentially a division, if you will, SPARC Europe, which is in 80 institutions in 14 countries. Following the same set of strategies to try to address the scholarly communication crisis, as some people call it, or to look at new ways of delivering scholarly information. We do things like advocacy, getting out the word, pressuring people to make change in the system. But we also do a lot of education, and that's what I do a lot on my trips on the road, to talk with different groups about what's been happening and what they might be able to do on their own campuses. We've also served as a catalyst to provide opportunities for, in particular, societies and nonprofit publishers to experiment with new forms of publishing that could be supported, that might give us a different way of providing low-cost alternatives to high-priced scholarly and scientific information. And we do that by providing some incubation support. Our members pay dues, and some of those dues have gone to support a few projects that have been demonstration projects. Our two goals are to expand information dissemination, taking advantage of that environment in which we're operating, taking advantage of the internet and new technologies, and also to respond to the needs of academia and research in order to extend the results of research to those who would benefit from it. As I mentioned, our interests have been with the nonprofit capacity, those 32% you saw in that earlier slide. And one of the things that we've done there have been to work with groups who have tried to come up with alternatives to some of the high-priced journals. These two examples are interesting ones. Organic Letters is published by the American Chemical Society, directly competing with an Elsevier title, Tetrahedron Letters. Since its launch, Organic Letters has now become the #1 place for chemists to write. It has the highest ISI impact factor, and yet it has retained a much reduced price than the subscription to TET Letters has been. The Logic Programming title is one where the editorial board of the older title, the more expensive title, essentially jumped ship and said, we don't like the fact that our title is so expensive because expensive titles are being canceled. And that means nobody's reading it. And so we would like to develop our own less costly title, and therefore theory and practice of logic programming was developed. Yeah.
But what's the comparison on the cost of the author of publishing in either of those? Or
this is not an author pays model for these. This is just, these are standard journals, available electronically. But the idea was that we would show that it is possible to create high-quality journals at much less cost. So therefore, the cost or the prices that we were paying for subscriptions were going for more than just the cost for production of a high-quality journal. We've also been supporting what we call digital platforms to help in societies in other ways or particular scientific communities develop new ways of extending their information dissemination activities. Bio1 are biology, ecology, environmental biology journals, who as individual titles could never go electronic, but by banding together in an aggregation that's partly supported by SPARC, a library consortium, a commercial printer and publisher, and the Society's overarching organization. They've been able to do very well and increase their access. Some of them had subscriptions of maybe 200 subscribers. By being in Bio1, they're now being read worldwide because they're part of an aggregation. Similarly, Project Euclid at Cornell University is a platform for mathematics and statistics journals. Independent titles, like the Bio1 titles, could not go electronic on their own, but by having some supported infrastructure available to them could do that. Earthscape and CogNet are different kinds of online resources that provide access to a wide range of materials, not only journal articles, but other kinds of magazines, data, communities, and so on. And they test different models for dissemination. What's happened in the past few years, it has been the development of something that you'll hear and read in your society journals is open access. And in 2002, a group of individuals who had been concerned with access to information met in Budapest and made a public statement about open access. And this is the primary statement. It's a much longer statement, but essentially it speaks to the importance of having access to scientific and scholarly information that's freely accessible on the open internet. It recognizes that there is a cost to producing that information, but the cost should not be to the reader of the information. It should be developed. It should be figured out in another way. And it is only for those materials that we expected that the scholars would give away anyway. Those materials that the scholars do to share their research results with other scholars and scientists and their future generations. So therefore, it is not intended to cover the novel that you want that advance from the publisher for, and it's not intended to cover textbooks that you want to be the author of the textbook and get royalties from that. The Budapest folks proposed two strategies. One, that of open access journals that are a different model than the subscription access we're currently familiar with, and self-archiving, meaning depositing of published works in either institutional or disciplinary repositories, and I'll describe each one of those. The Budapest statement was followed by several other statements in other meeting locations, thereby having their own names, Bethesda, Berlin, so on, that spoke to the same thing about the importance of access to scientific and scholarly information. And the three primary ones, Budapest, Bethesda, and Berlin, are thought of as the BBB statement and thought of pretty much similarly. And they have been followed by many statements from national, international organizations also providing support for this kind of access to information. The Wellcome Trust, which is an organization in Great Britain, had indicated their support for it and had said, we will provide funding support for authors who wish to publish in some of the open access journals, so that as a funder, they were making a public statement of their support for these principles. Well, why do we care about open access? Well, in general, we care because from the society side of things, there are benefits, as we've seen in the SARS example, and the fact that technology is now available for us. We also have the pressures that have been placed upon us in the libraries and in our higher education institutions, research institutions, to push for change in the system. And so these two forces have been coming together, and I think what we've been seeing in the past couple of years is what people would consider a tipping kind of point. We feel that open access is important from a public good perspective because it does in fact expand, makes more information available to more people in a faster manner. We can take advantage, we can exploit that internet which is out there for us to use. And most people have agreed that innovation happens the more information you have available for both economic prosperity and especially in some areas for health issues. There's also acknowledgement that there will be dislocation as this happens, but the long-term benefits will outweigh any of the current dislocation. From the researcher point of view, open access increases the ability of your research to be shared and viewed and cited and used. And this is the first of the studies that began to look at it, and the one we tend to see, which is Steve Lawrence's work. And they've continued to try to do more documenting of this. By making something openly accessible, you're making it freely available over the internet. Someone will find it and use it, rather than having it hidden away in a published journal that nobody's subscribing to because they can't afford it. So one of the strategies is to take a look at how much are we expanding access to this information, and there are a number of studies going on in various disciplines where people are just looking at counting, finding new ways to count citations that were a result of access to information over the internet, comparing that to standard citations through ISI. And it's probably worth noting that ISI itself is looking at how do we start measuring impact based on open access information. Now, for a number of years, SPARC had actually been supporting and encouraging new business models, and one of those had been open access journals. We hadn't really named them that until a couple of years ago. The first one was New Journal of Physics, where the supporting organizations had said that it would cost the author or the author's institution $500, any accepted paper, and you pay for it, we'll make the resulting article available free over the internet. It was slow getting started, but they've actually been doing pretty well. And a library consortium, the Utah Academic Library Consortium, said that any author in the state of Utah that wrote for New Journal of Physics, they would support the fee because they felt it was important to test this as a model. Yes.
Are these not free?
Yes. Yeah. Open access journals and the discussions that I have, they're all the titles that I show you would be reference journals. The two big names in open access publishing these days that you'll see, Biomed Central, which is an enterprise in the United Kingdom. They provide a platform for a large number of open access journals. And they charge $500 to the author or the author's institution. And Public Library of Science, which was developed out of some of the people who were involved in the efforts to do the Budapest Statement, and also to encourage authors and scientists to sign a petition saying we're not going to write for, edit for, or review for any journal that does not make its articles available for free after 6 months. They came out with a publishing operation, support from the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation, and they're out now with have announced 5 different titles, plus biology, plus medicine are the first, plus pathogens is the next, computational biology is coming out soon. They charge $1,500 from their asking for, but they do have mechanisms for those individuals whose institutions or the individuals can't afford it to subsidize. And it's for published items. Oops. The open access journal concept is that you pay for the publication aspect rather than the access aspect of it. And when people were first starting the costing out of that, they figured that within the system, it costs about a quarter of the total amount to do the paper publication. So 25% of what we pay for the overall system is what it would cost us if we shifted it over to paying for the publication. But we recognize that each discipline is different, and it's going to depend on how the disciplines wish to operate and what works best for them, and there will be a number of experiments. And right now there's a number of models out there, and here are just some ideas for the business models that have come about as people have talked about how do we fund open access journals. And just this week, another major publisher or a major aggregator and publisher, Blackwell Science, has come out with a statement saying they will support authors who wish to essentially purchase open access for their titles. So the publisher says, all right, you give me $1,500 or $2,500 is Blackwell's charge. We'll make this title open access, and concomitantly, after the end of the year, however many articles were open access, we'll shift the money and reduce the costs, or at least keep the costs lower or somewhat the same for the subscription, so that if more and more people decide to pay for publication, the subscription price decreases, and we'll see whether in fact over time that the pay for publication model works. And this had been proposed actually as one strategy by our Spark Europe colleague, and there was an entomology journal that had started this as well. He wasn't charging, the editor was not charging as much, but the idea is let's go ahead and try some experiments here. Some of the open access journals are in fact covered by just institutional support for the infrastructure, because all of the editing is contributed by the editorial folks. The reviews, as many of you know who are reviewers, is contributed. So as far as they're concerned, there's no need for additional cost. Large-scale publishing operations have overhead that they wish to recover, so they are looking to make sure that they don't lose money on those operations. There is a directory of open access journals right now, or as of last week, it had 1,472 titles. These are all peer-reviewed titles. 364 of them are now searchable at the article level. They're starting to index the articles, and so there's 64,000 articles. Now, certainly they're not as large a journal as some of the long-time titles that are out there because they're new in many cases, but there are a few that have been around for a while, and they were picked up by the open access journal directory.
In one of your earlier PowerPoint slides, you were looking at the cost of journals. One was 11,000.
Right.
There was, okay. And you kind of asked if the authors had to pay. You said no. So, can you explain to me why I would want to spend, or have my institution spend, $1,500 to publish in an open access journal when you started the lecture saying that journals can be cost-effective with no fees at $300?
Right. Well, it depends on which fields you're in. Some of the titles are very expensive, and some people actually already pay to publish because they have to pay page charges.
And the examples you gave were science.
Right.
For hard science, and the examples you've been giving are hard science or medical.
Right. And
That's
that
the same
it's the same discipline. And in fact, part of it is a society. Some of it is a push for open access that you would not necessarily be paying. Your institution would not be paying. The grant that you got for doing the work would be paying to cover the dissemination of it. And there are more funding organizations that are saying, we think it's important to move in this direction, so we would cover the cost for you for that. Certainly some of the $1,500 prices are more expensive, but they're also looking at, does it really cost this much? Some people will say that some of the prices that some of the commercial titles are choosing to put out there are so high that nobody's going to do it, but they can then say that they tested the model and it didn't work. But there are a number of experiments going on, and there are a variety of journals that the subscription costs are high, but they are covering other things rather than just production of the journal. They're covering in commercial land, they're covering a lot of the cost of the profits, which are in the 30% range for some commercial publishers. In large societies, they're covering the cost of conferences, reduced rates for students, for grants, and so on. And there are people beginning to question whether subscriptions should actually cover all of those costs as well. So it's actually like, I think about it as a plate of spaghetti. There are just a lot of things being tugged on these days, and there's a whole big mess in the middle that we're trying to work out. But that's a fair question. There are, to support some of these up-and-coming services, there are up-and-coming journals as well as some existing journals who are moving into an open access or making some of their previous journal articles available, freely accessible, supported services. Highwire Press, which is at Stanford University, supports quite a number of scientific journals in like microbiology fields that they make available a lot of articles for free after about a year. The publisher has decided that they've earned the revenue that they need for the journal support in the first year, and so they make the back files available and open. Other publishers other organizations are stepping up to provide services for institutions or individuals that wish to start open access journals but may not have the technology they need. And a few of these are in the developing countries. These are developing country activities because they're finding that the internet now expands access and shares information, good research that they've been doing that they've not been able to get into the mainstream press because of where they've been located. The other strategy that we've been looking at has been one where what we look at now, instead of just talking about journals, which has been our traditional way of getting out scholarly research, is to say, how do we get out the information but it's not necessarily in the journal article format. And those could be considered repositories or big web servers that hold information. We've got a couple of examples that Spark has been involved in. One was DSpace, a project that's up at MIT, now is a federation of an open software that institutions are buying to make their own repository where people can put information about articles that they're working on, working papers, technical reports, conference proceedings, and so on. And eScholarship, which is a pretty big operation out of the University of California system, that is a repository that many of their various institutes are putting all of their stuff up, and just recently announced that they're also making a place for journal publishing, peer review activities that are streamlined, and postprints for authors who have written, as you have in your articles, a place to deposit within the University of California system and make it available. Why do we care about institutional repositories? These have become ways of us actually sharing information about what do we have. From a university or institution point of view, it's actual stewardship. These are resources that have been developed from the work of the university, and we have a responsibility to maintain those resources over time. It's efficient to manage them in a central location rather than having, in many cases, faculty or websites all over the place and perhaps aren't being maintained in a way that can be delivered up for other people to see what's happening in their libraries or what's happening in their institution. It's a way for research institutions to showcase what they're doing. And in an age of accountability, especially in our higher ed institutions where the legislators are saying, what have you done out there? How can I show them what I've been doing, but having a repository that says, here's the research that's going on here. Here's the interesting activities that we're engaged in. It makes it possible for information to be disseminated more efficiently, and it helps actually in the management of our scholarly communication crisis by saying, we're going to open up the scholarship that we have at this institution. This is a slide from Herbert Bonensemble, who is at Los Alamos Labs, which talks about the institutional repository concept by saying people can deposit in any kind of repository, and we have standards that do exist, and they're open standards that are available for the process of what has been a journal process, the registration, certification, awareness, and archiving. All of those are things that journals have done for us, but in a new environment, the journal could be overlaid on some of those items in repositories, collected together, shared in a completely different way than we thought about before. We have to start thinking out of the box now. And the registration piece is essentially the point at which you deposit something. I have made my statement, this is my work, and the certification can be done by my peers who can comment on it, and we can put it out in the journal to make it aware, but we can also shove it out there over the internet. And then the archiving is still part of the institution's responsibility to maintain access over the long term to the research done at that institution. A bunch of projects going on, national and international projects. This is the UK one, the Netherlands. These are national projects funded centrally by their higher education organizations. This is, of course, Archive, one in economics, and PubMed Central for NIH publications. I'm not sure how many of you have seen this policy notice yet, but beginning May 2nd, National Institutes of Health have asked that the investigators begin to deposit the results of their research in PubMed Central as a way of essentially building up NIH's own disciplinary repository, but also as a way to make it publicly available to the society at large, or the taxpayer who pays for it. And the posting of articles in PubMed Central is being encouraged strongly encourage as soon as possible, but definitely within 12 months after the item has been published. And a few publishers are now coming out saying that we will, on behalf of the author, put those documents in PubMed Central for them. What are our major obstacles? Well, the two that we've seen have been, from a publisher point of view, that they will not be able to recover their costs or generate the necessary surpluses for them to continue their work. And that's why a lot of emphasis has been going on in people studying the different kinds of economic models for how do we change the system. And in the second strategy for the Budapest initiative, it is an open archiving strategy. It's just that a lot of people are unaware that it is possible for you to go ahead and put items in disciplinary or institutional repositories. Most publishers, 92% of them, from the last count, say it's okay to do that. From an academic point of view, promotion and tenure concerns, some people have felt that, oh, well, these open access journals or these electronic publications aren't really, they're not valid yet. Those are concerns that would happen with any new journal that anybody publishes in, but we're seeing more of them become titles of importance in a discipline, and so I don't think that we're going to, that time will help that situation, and it's not really a problem. As I mentioned, all of the open access journals that are collected in the open access repository directory are peer reviewed. That's it just is a matter that they just appear as electronic and open access. Many funding organizations are coming out now in support of open access by saying we will provide funds to cover the cost, and the business models are being studied. For those of us in libraries, as well as those of you teaching, how do we get at research now if everything is out there instead of having it come into us? And that's something we have to start thinking about. Because it used to be that everything sort of flowed in. Even the subscription-based journals were actually a pretty good thing for libraries because, they just came in and then we checked them in and the system, if we didn't get one, the system would tell us you're missing this issue and so on. But if it's all really freely accessible, how do we ensure that people, our students and our faculty, get at the good stuff? And certainly there are concerns about copyright and intellectual property. There are license agreements and help for that. There is a whole directory on publishers, what they say you can or can't do. And as I mentioned, a number of them are already saying it's okay to post in local servers. And so authors can go ahead and self-archive their research results. The group that's concerned, of course, are society publishers, those small places that only have one or two titles. They were, in fact, early adopters of the concept of open access, some of them, and they need to be supported as they continue to experiment, because many of them are trying experiments with open access. What can you as faculty and scientists do to move this movement forward? Well, you can start by talking about in your own promotion and tenure activities whether electronic publications are even part of it. In some institutions, if you haven't had that discussion, you need to start that. And you need to start thinking a little bit more about intellectual property issues as well. That certainly, there are plenty of resources on that. I can direct you to some if you want. And think about an institutional repository. You have one right here. It's in paper right now. If all of the stuff that's in here was in electronic form on a web server, that is the beginning of an institutional repository. And that's possible for you to do. For those of you who have published documents, we can look up and find out whether your publisher would say it's okay to post this. For those of you who've done conference proceedings and whatever, they can just be dumped right into a repository. But you already have the makings of a repository. For authors and editors, you can think about the journals in which you actually submit Are they high priced? If so, what in the world can you do about them? Are there other places for you to submit? What kind of public statement can you make about the importance of providing access to scholarly and scientific information? For those titles that you feel you must publish in, are there ways that you can modify the contracts to make sure that you have the ability to deposit that article or to work with that article or to use that article down the road? Because a lot of times people are surprised to find out that they signed away rights in order to make that title available. If you're a society member, you can work with your society to consider alternatives, to look at new business models, to think about other ways of publishing, and to encourage them to think about open access as a way to extend science. Because we are seeing evidence that the more science is, the more open the titles are, the more open science is, and the more communication happens. And for individuals, everybody in this room can go ahead and look for an open access journal which to publish. If you can't do that, there's a repository for pretty much everything. There is a directory of repositories out there. And if you can't do that, you can at least put it up on your own website for the time being until things are sorted out and there's a place to put your stuff. But you can all be a part of a movement that is encouraging the dissemination of science and scholarship for those who we think need it most, our colleagues and the next generation. So if you need more resources, we have plenty for you, and I'd be happy to take any questions that you might have about any of the other information that I presented. Thank you.
Are there questions that you'd like to ask Julia at this time?
That's me. Hi. Yes, I have a question. I'm Jamie. Hi. Regarding tenure and promotion, they're asking people to respect the open access publishing. And you say that, basically you said that's becoming more respectable, and it will be more. But meanwhile, we're in this window where we have to be very careful with this year, next year, and the next few years, applicants coming up for promotion and tenure. What do you suggest for that? Specifically for me as a member of the tenure committee, for example, what can I do right now to prepare myself to address these issues with the tenure committee next year?
One of the things you can do is take a look at your tenure guidelines. Do you even explicitly state that it's okay to publish in electronic titles? Because some places don't even acknowledge that. So by just making sure that electronic is part of that, and that you're looking at quality, not the format in which it appears, but you're looking at the quality of it. For the new titles, that's people are looking at ISI rankings a lot for that, but many of those titles are showing up. ISI is picking them up, and so they'll have information out there in the next year or so, and some of these are quite respectable numbers. And that senior faculty can be supportive of junior faculty publishing this way, and senior faculty can be examples by saying, okay, I've published, and I heard this on Tuesday, faculty members said, I've already published, and I don't need to worry about tenure. I can go ahead and put an article in this open access journal, which will increase the credibility of that journal for other people to publish in it. So one way that you can do it is to support that as well. Take a look at the editorial board and say, oh, I know these people, they're good people, I'm happy to supply an article for them. Okay, thanks.
This question has to do with quality, and it was kind of on your list of issues, but I think it's under that issue, that listing of peer review. I've noticed personally in newspapers and the popular press an awful lot of bad science.
Right.
You read, for example, that if you drive on the inside lane of the highway, you're going to get brain cancer, things like that. And there's an awful lot of that goes on nowadays. A conclusion that you could draw is that because we have so much open access and open activities in sciences, so we're getting bad science as one of the results. because we're not as tight as we used to be on peer review, when we had things pretty tightly controlled in the publications business. Now, you can't, we're in a new world nowadays, and we can't say that that's not going to happen. But we do have to guard against the degradation of the quality of our scientific research when we have more and more of this open access, it seems to me. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, and one alternative view is that if you get it out there, and there is more opportunity for it to be debunked.
True.
Because there are people that feel that the peer review process has been elitist.
Yeah, true. That's true. However, the debunking won't find its way into the nightly paper, and most people won't understand that.
Won't read that, yeah. And that's where, people like the Public Library of Science, which has a very rigorous peer review process. Part of what they have to do, and they are doing it, is to get the results of their papers that they publish into the public press by, fostering relationships with the newspaper reporters so that they report on the good stuff rather than the bad and odd stuff. But yeah, you're right. But I think that the view is held that if you open it up, you've got more chance for it to be looked at and saying, no, it's not very good, rather than saying that, oh, because it appeared in this journal, it must be okay, when it may not be good science. Because there's a list of articles, or there's stories which people will tell about things that were really crappy science that got, for years, were taken until they finally got to Richard.
Do some of the repositories allow annotation? So if you have, that's the benefit of this electronic scholarly communication, you can post a paper, but you can also allow your peers to also do replies or responses and annotate your paper and your work.
There are technologies that you can. I think there's been a push to try those in some of the projects.
Still, to counter in every discipline, there are certain worldviews which are politically correct, and there are certain worldviews which are sort of frowned upon. It's not necessarily related to scientific integrity, and having this alternative publication site enables alternative worldviews to gain prominence and ascendancy, and then will force the acceptance to the more disciplined side of the house of alternative worldviews.
Yeah.
So it does promote a greater diversity of worldviews out there.
Yeah, and in that, I think of just world, but it's also, that's one of the arguments that people in developing countries have said. It's very hard for them to get into some of the current publications because of where they're located. They just, but they can create quality journals in their location, and it can be found. Their research can be found. Now, whereas before they couldn't do it because there's no way they could develop a journal and get it disseminated anywhere because they can't afford the paper to print it on. But they can do something electronic.
I have a dream where the papers disappear and are replaced by interactive demonstrations of the content, the data, the ideas, the concepts, and so forth, where the peer reviewing basically is a link. A link from good people to good content. When do you think that dream might be realized?
I don't know. I'd love to see that, and I think that there will be some early adopters of that kind. People that are doing modeling of things where the kind of stuff that they're doing requires constant communication over the internet, and so the main thing is for them to get into that and be able to share. Now, does everybody have the level of connectivity they need to have, the computing power they need to have? I don't know. That's the other issue, but there certainly would be places that I could see this happening sooner rather than later.
Yeah, I think it takes breaking out of the publication cycle We have a website that has a lot of these applications on it. And it's very gratifying to look at your web logs and to see that somebody has spent 2 to 3 hours working with the content that you've put out there. That's much more satisfying than maybe or not they've read my paper.
Right.
You know, you can see that something is happening, that interaction is measurable.
Well, and that's because of the promotion and tenure question, because the guy who did a lot of work with the STOA consortium, he was saying, hey, we put a lot of work into developing that resource, and it's being used, and we can track the use, and all these people are taking advantage of it and doing other things. How do I, as a faculty member, get credit for that work? Because that's really, I'm providing a foundation of research for other people, and we're building on each other. And we don't have mechanisms, because we sit there and count and say, well, how many papers did they publish in this journal with this ISI ranking? Or did they publish a book if they're in the humanities? And that, I mean, we have to break out of those boundaries as well.
Are there other questions?
We have more.
Oh, more of those, okay. We have more brochures for open access. Well, I'd like to thank Julia Blixrud for coming to Prescott. And thank you, authors and contributors for the Scholarly Speaking program. I hope to see you again next year.